Hi, Chris. How are you today?
Good morning. I'm really good. Thank you. Thank you. We're finally getting some sun here.
Oh, that's
That's
awesome.
great.
We are not in Toronto, but that's good to know that you are.
Toronto can be dark. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, my name is Shahbaz.
And I'm Daniel.
Thank you so much for sharing your time with us on the movie podcast today. We are such massive fans of yours. And The Town is a movie that Daniel and I watch monthly at this point.
We really do. Yeah. Watch it a lot.
It's
Yeah,
cool.
we're constantly quoting
it's
it to
a
each
fave
other.
of mine too. It's one of my faves. Yeah.
And it's great to see you in another Boston film. How familiar were you with the Boston Strangler story before joining the film?
Actually, I was saying I was brought up with that story, and coming from Missouri around the same time, I don't know if you remember, there was a mass murder of the Clutter family that Truman Capote wrote a book about called In Cold Blood. And that was another big story in the early 60s. So I was familiar with the Boston Strangler, and not in depth, but that was a pretty frightening story happening in the early 60s. So I was a little aware of it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's one of those stories, I think, too, that we still hear about today. And it's still that tale that it's still within the media. And I think the collective mindset of a lot of people still today, right?
Yeah, and and in some corners, people still think the case has not been completely cracked.
Yeah, it's one of those stories that really kind of shaped what investigative journalism is today. Now, when you go back to the 60s, when these events occurred, what surprised you most about how investigative journalism worked to bring these stories to light?
Well, I found it, um, I didn't believe I didn't understand how political uh, the news can be, the police department, the Boston government. Um, the police department was apparently really embarrassed because they didn't pay much attention to these murders, and they didn't come up with too many clues. And Jack McLean, my character, I just followed the script, and I can see he's not too interested about these murders either. Loretta has to push him and prod him, and she has to dig and come up with all this research that she has before he even appreciates what these women have uncovered.
Yeah, it's
It
pretty.
was a
It's pretty.
very
Yeah.
tough time, especially for women in the newsroom. It was ridiculous. They got no respect. Men were very dismissive of
Right.
these women.
Right. And I think one of the only good things to really come out of this is that we could look at it as a time to, like, we need to do better than what we did then. And I think hopefully we're in a spot now in the world that
We are. Yeah.
we hopefully are
You
doing
can
much better
you
now.
can count on that. That's true. I have an acquaintance, Eileen McNamara, who is a Pulitzer Prize winning journalist and worked for years for the Boston Globe, educated at Columbia Journalism College, and she was more involved in the newsroom in the 80s, and said only in the mid 80s did things for women in the newsroom get better and better and better, and they're still working on it.
Wow.
Definitely.
Well, Chris, you're phenomenal in this movie, and thank you again so much for your time today. All the best to you, and we're looking forward to talking to you again, this side or the other.
Thank you, guys. Yeah, I got you. Thank you.
Hey, Alessandro, how are you?
Hey, I'm good. How you guys doing?
We're doing excellent. Thank you so much for sharing your time with us on the movie podcast today. We're huge fans of yours and excited to talk about the film.
I appreciate it. Thank you.
Your day's going well so far, I hope?
Yeah, so far it's beautiful out. Everybody's been nice.
That's good. Can't wait to ruin that streak
Yeah, we're
right
not,
now.
we're not the nicest ones. We're from Canada. So.
Don't get any ideas.
Yeah, famously mean people in Canada.
Exactly. Now, Alessandro, you're from Boston, so we got to ask, how familiar were you with the Boston Strangler before joining the film?
Not that familiar. I'd heard of it, obviously, and it wasn't really until I started researching the role and talking to family members who were in college in the 60s at that time, and hearing them sort of talk about just the atmosphere in town for those months, and being as women being afraid to walk home at night alone, and that there was that kind of like eerie quality for that time, or, around that time. I think one family friend told me somebody had knocked on her window, and then she didn't see anyone out there, and then she thought she saw someone in the trees, and I don't know. There's all kinds of stories like that. But so I think, yeah, people were creeped out at that moment. But I didn't really know any of the details about DeSalvo or the possibility of there being like multiple murderers and copycat stuff or any of that. I didn't know anything about it.
Right. And and I think something that we always find so fascinating when we go back in that time is to see how like technology played a role into how it was being investigated. Was there anything that really surprised you when you were preparing for the role of Detective Connolly, that you're like, oh wow, like this is a really interesting way how the authorities handled this situation?
Well, I mean, I think that my character is based on a couple of real people, and I think that there were people in the force who were really frustrated with the way that the investigation was being run, because forensic psychology, which was kind of new frontier at that time, wasn't being like adequately tapped. And my guy was just pissed off that people were ignoring the need to profile a killer and to link these cases together. And so he kind of risks his whole career and reputation within the force to start to work in tandem with this journalist, which was definitely a no-no at that time, and still would be.
Right.
Absolutely. Now, right before we just wrap up here, I just want to ask, as a man of Boston, what is something that everyone gets wrong about the Boston accent?
Everything. I mean, like, it's classically a really tough one for people. And obviously, I mean, I'd say, like, I think pretty much all the examples of good ones are from people who grew up there or spent some part of their childhood there. I mean, I honestly I didn't really grow up there. I lived there till I was 5, and then I was in Vermont for a bunch of years through grade school, and then my mom was living back there in Watertown from when I was 13, but I was by that time away at boarding school and college, and so I came home, and obviously I was around, and so I'd heard people talk like that all through my life, but I wasn't like, it's not like I went to public school in Boston growing up. So,
right.
But I think, like, obviously I had the advantage of being familiar with it. And if you haven't heard it since you were young, I don't know, it just trips people up.
Alessandro, thank you so much for your time. All the best, and congratulations with the film.
Hey, thanks a lot.